Getting some advice early on is a really good idea, because that doesn't necessarily mean you need to take a lawyer to mediation. But I think for the most part, if you have an idea of what some likely outcomes might be, then I think it just helps you respond to offers that are made and proposals that are made a little bit more well-informed.
Welcome to Divorce Down Under, the Aussie way, where a regular guy like me, Matt, will help you navigate a fresh start following a divorce. After experiencing a divorce and going through all sorts of emotions, I hope to bring you the right tools and advice so you can set up a better life after divorce. Hear from experts and people like you who have lived it, sharing insights so you may find peace in a new beginning. Hi Ella, welcome to Divorce Down Under.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, all the way from Perth, and
yeah.
I'm obviously here in Budgeon on the Sunshine Coast. It's
You're
really
closer to the weekend than I am, I think. So it's nice for you.
That's one positive. Again, thank you. And I think we caught up a couple of weeks ago, and we were having a discussion around. You raised some really nice points around mediation, and I think it came up around the fact that there's such a lengthy time wait for a trial in Perth, and I'm unsure. I know in Brisbane it's about a year and a half thereabouts, pushing close to 2, but I know there in Perth it was much longer. And I really thought you came up with some really good ideas, and I thought it'd be great to be able to share those with the audience and just give them an idea of the weight of trial and the impact of actually having to wait so long for trial, and more focusing on, which is what you said, was more around try and mediate. You need to do your best to try and mediate. And I agree with that comment too, because it can end up costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So over to you. What are some your thoughts on trial and the length of it?
I think that's right. The kind of the obvious one is the financial costs for people. And you are talking about like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like in the multiple hundreds of thousands. And I've kind of come to the view that while that does have a place, like sometimes there's a need for that and there's some problems that can't be solved between people, I think that those cases are really few and far between. Like for the most part, I think that everything kind of has a solution that you can get to, that maybe not everyone's gleefully happy with that solution when you come to it, but I would be pretty unusual that I would speak to someone maybe 6 months down the track and they wouldn't be like, oh, I'm so glad I just got out of that. Like we could still be in that system now. Like, I'm so happy with where things landed. So on top of the financial cost, you're really just talking about mainly an emotional cost and a time cost for people as well. Like years of litigation, and in the family court in Perth, you're looking somewhere between sometimes 3 to 5 years to get to a trial. That is such a long period of your life, such a long period in your children's lives, that by the time you get there, the money, that's a massive thing that you've spent, but that's kind of been gradual. Like you're talking about, you're probably not the same person anymore that you were back at the start of it, So anything you can do to avoid that, I would say go for it.
Yeah, I agree. And in the end, who wants a trial or court to be deciding the outcomes of whether or not you have a child or whether or not you get this asset and so forth? I think, the fact around where you mentioned you need to try your best to mediate yourself, which in the end it will give you more of an option. Would you agree with that?
I do, because I say to my clients all the time, like, no one knows your children better than the two of you. And while you might not be the other person's biggest fan at the moment, do you really want some man or some woman sitting up there who has never met your children and will never meet your children, sitting there and saying, I'm telling you guys that this is best for them? Like if someone tried to tell me that, from my perspective, that I know what's best for your kids, I couldn't think of anything worse. So you've got an opportunity there to take control of that process and to have some say in it. And otherwise you just kind of throw yourselves at the mercy of the court. And while, yes, they're very good at what they do, and of course they make these decisions that they have to make because you guys can't agree, they don't want to make these decisions. Like they're not down there thinking, oh, bring us more cases. Like they want people to go. And frequently you'll hear magistrates and judges saying, actually, you guys are the best people to kind of work this out. Like we're here if you really need us to, but surely there's a way you guys can workshop this and come to a better result or a better outcome.
Yeah, I agree. Do you really want the courts deciding these important decisions in your life?
Yeah.
Can you give, so for example, if they managed to get through to the mediation and there was a glimmer of hope, is there a way that you would sort of push them into preparing for mediation? Is there sort of a strategy, or is there an approach you
Yeah.
take specifically?
For me, I think a really, and it sounds a bit self-serving, but I think getting some advice early on is a really good idea, because that doesn't necessarily mean you need to take a lawyer to mediation or anything like that. A lot of people choose to, and I do think that really does have its place in terms of coming up with other ideas or putting things in a different perspective or showing you some alternatives that if you don't agree here, this is what the outcome might be. But I think for the most part, getting some advice early on is really important, because if you have an idea of what some likely outcomes might be, then I think it just helps you respond to offers that are made and proposals that are made a little bit more well informed. So let's say someone comes to the mediation and says, "Oh, I want the house and I want all the superannuation and I want this," and you can go, "Well, hang on, that's a bit weird. Like, Ella told me that that's really unlikely to happen. I've got a better idea that it might be somewhere between this range, like between 50 and 60% or something, not like 80 to 90% or 70 to 80%. And I always say to clients, forewarned is forearmed. So if you have a little bit of information, then you can go into that process, not feeling like you need to have all these complicated legal arguments, because I think often those don't have a place at mediation, but knowing that this is where I might end up if we don't get a resolution today. There's cost involved in that. Here's what the legal fees are. Here's what the cost of me paying the mortgage until we get a resolution might be, all of these things. And you can weigh those up and then take that and go, okay, well, I'm going to keep those figures in mind. There's maybe $100,000 worth of value there. I'm going to keep that in mind here, because maybe it's better for me to make an offer of $50,000 more than this, than they're offering me, but with keeping it in mind that I'm going to have some pretty significant costs on the other end if we don't settle.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if it did get to the stage where they had gone through mediation and it was, sometimes twice and three times, I can see people have efforts, which is a good thing. But if it doesn't end up coming out where they'd like it, and it does go through to trial, which I think Perth would be one of the states I wouldn't want to be going to wait 4 years, because, as you know, you're a different person and you can end up fighting back and forth, and that can cost a lot of money. And I think that's where you mentioned the hundreds of thousands, and that's where it comes from in the end. It's just that back and forth. But if they were going to trial, are there any recommendations on how to prepare for something like that?
Look, I think it's one of those things, because of the delays, your case just fundamentally changes as you go on. And quite often the most recent things that are happening are going to be more relevant than something that might have happened 4 years ago around the time that you separated. It's not to say that those things aren't relevant and won't come into that space and come into that decision making. But I think that what I always say is, like, the most important thing is going to be what's happening most recently. So, for example, if there were allegations of drug use or something, have you got a recent drug test? So, yeah, maybe 4 years ago you had a test that was dirty, or there were some allegations of drug use, but what test do you have most recently? Do you have, for property matters, do you have all your current values up to date and everything? Because I can tell you, I certainly in Perth, I'm not sure what it's like over East, I think it's similar. The value of your house 4 years ago is certainly not going to be the value of your house today. Like, there's been sort of some real shifting in the market. Having a good understanding of what you can manage practically. So whether that's financially, what you can borrow to keep a house, or whether it's in terms of parenting, like, can you make this care arrangement work with your roster, or, with the distance between your houses and all of those things, keeping those practical issues in mind so that you can be prepared to answer those questions, because you better believe they're going to be asked.
Yeah, true. And one thing the viewers might not, if they are going through any divorce of a kind and they are heading to trial, is that it won't likely be just the one trial. It'll likely be a few trials. They won't make a decision, generally speaking, straight on the spot. So there is a likelihood that they'll be sitting 2 or 3 trials or more.
And sometimes what can happen here is that, they might say, okay, we think your trial is going to be dealt with in 2 days. And then there might be additional witnesses, or something might take longer, or someone might be sick or something. And then all of a sudden you're talking about going what's called part heard, which means that you're not getting a resolution, then you're not even finishing your trial, then you're coming back for another sitting for that, on those issues. And then, like you kind of said before, Matt, you're talking about sometimes months between finishing your trial and getting a decision. So that's more time. And I think that something really important to remember is that, particularly for parenting matters, if you enter the court system and your child is, say, 8 years old, your child is so different at 12 years old when you kind of come out of it on the other end. Like, we're not talking about the same issues, the same problems, the same kind of arrangements that you might have been talking about when your child was younger and when you entered the process. So that in and of itself is such a good reason to try and get out earlier, because, like, for a start, do you want your child for, half of their life or more than the longer than they've even been born for? Do you want them to be, watching their parents fighting it out in this system? Like, I just can't think of a worse environment for kids. So I know it's very, it's one of these things that, like, the research now is saying that parental conflict is, like, as bad for kids as other risk issues, like, drug use or alcohol use or serious mental health issues or that sort of thing. So it's really worth keeping that in mind, that although your ex doesn't have to be your best friend or your favorite person, but, like, there are these little people in the middle of it, that there's a real reason why you should just try, if you can, and get it out of that system. Because if you spend years filing affidavits that say, oh, they're a terrible person and they did this and I hate the way they do this and they're, all of these things, it's really hard to come back from that and really hard to kind of have an amicable relationship after that.
Yeah, I agree. And I talked about it in one of my last episodes about having a business relationship and trying to and I think that forces you to sort of maintain more of a positive relationship, because you're not treating it personally. If you think about a business relationship, you respect the business, you respect the person, and I think that forces you to think that way as well.
Yeah.
One thing
No, I think that's really good advice. And if you do think of it as a bit more transactional, like, that's why I think it's important to have something in writing. Like, you go into an office environment or a workplace and you might have an employment contract, or you might have policies that say this is how we're going to behave or this is how we don't behave. And I think sometimes setting those expectations clearly for each other and having something where it's easier to take the emotion out of it, because you're not having to have conversations every day about when are you dropping them off? Are you going to bring the school back? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? What about, like, if you're on the same page a little bit more, then I think it takes that heat out of it a bit, and you can just sort of go, okay, we know what we're doing because we've got this kind of agreement between us that this is how we're going to operate. And I think that does make things run a little bit more smoothly. Like, I see it all the time, and I think if you've got something, doesn't mean you have to stick to it all the time. You guys can agree outside of that, but you've got something to fall back on.
Yeah, agree, 100%. So when did you get into have you always been practicing in the family law space?
Really early on. I didn't ever think I wanted to be a family lawyer. I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And then I did some sort of work before I was admitted as a lawyer in the criminal space. And I thought that was really interesting, but I thought, maybe I'll go and try something else. So I went to a commercial firm for a while, which, I have to say, I hated it. I didn't find it very interesting at all, but it teaches you other really good skills, like, drafting agreements and things like that, which are still so important now. But family law was something I kind of fell into by accident. And now I can't really imagine doing anything else now. Like, I love this, but I always say if I wasn't going to do this, I'd go and do something completely different, like be a chocolatier or something like that, do something very different. But I think it's true. Like, you're really every day, it sounds really cliche, but seeing those kind of the problems people have that are so real, and it's impacting your family and your children and your relationship and your money. And apart from someone's health, I can't think of anything that's really more important than those things. So having a real impact on those things kind of daily, that's for me, I'm like, that's what appeals to me, I think. And also for me, I think it's being able to look at these problems, which are, like, deeply emotional and deeply personal to people, but saying, here's a commercial outcome that you can or commercial perspective that you can bring to this. So it's still, like, it's not just sort of, let's all sit around and and feel very emotional about this, and there's a place for that, but also saying, hang on, there's a real cost involved in this. There's a real delay involved. Let's weigh all these things up and let's try and come out with some commercial outcomes to kind of exit you from this system and get you just like actually moving on to live your life. Because that's what everyone wants at the end of the day, is just to move on. You've left a relationship. Most people don't want to be back there wallowing in it and having conflict for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I agree. And that segues in. I was going to ask you a question, and you touched on emotions as well. You seem to be all over it yourself, and you come across as a very positive person. And I like your mindset around, keeping them out of the court. And obviously, sometimes it's inevitable, and there's nothing you can do about that. Unfortunately, the one party could take you in that direction, but obviously, divorce can be a mixed bag of emotions. Can you offer any advice around managing these emotions? Because you'd see a lot of different parents.
Oh, we do. And it's one of those things that, like, I have to remind people, like, there are people, like, that's a whole job in and of itself to give emotional support to people. And some of the people, you've got your lawyer there and they're giving you this advice and you want to rely on them, and you can for so many things. But emotional support, sometimes I say, oh, look, I can give you a little bit of that, but that's not really my role. And I don't think I'm appropriately qualified to give it either. So having your village around you, and whether that is like your family or friends or therapeutic support, I think is really important for people going through this, because for most people, this will be the hardest thing that they ever have to go through, like at least top 2 or 3 hardest things you'll ever have to go through. So I think having a bit of a sounding board, having someone you can run even a message past that you want to send to your ex in a rage, like we've all been there, where you're just like you want to kind of bash something out. Having someone you can run that by to be a bit of a calming mind or a calming influence, I think is a really good thing. And otherwise, like, it's just one of those times you just got to look after yourself. Like, I know, again, sounds so cliche, but it's really tricky. Like, most of us have been through a breakup at some stage, and we know that there's all sorts of things changes that you go through in your confidence and emotionally. And if you've got, kids that are relying on you as well to stay strong, it's really, really tough. So you've got to be kind to yourself. And the other advice I always give is don't lower your colors. So don't dash off that message in anger. Don't say to your kids, oh, your mum's really awful, or your dad's a dickhead, or something like that. Like, you don't need to do that, because what I say to all my clients when they come in is picture everything that you write, text, email, say, whatever, picture it ending up on an affidavit and a magistrate or a judge reading that and think, gee, would I really want them to see that side of me? And that's the best advice I can give, really, is because all you can do is run your own race. You can't control what someone else is doing. But if you can present yourself in the best light and they're sending you horrible messages and you're not rising to that, that reflects really well on you. So I think that that's something that, just don't lower your colors, try and just kind of run your own race and keep a cool head if you can, as difficult as that can be.
I agree 100%. Well done for that advice. It's it really varies. You can focus on your health and your emotions, and I think if you do, and you try and control the things that you can control, but the things that you can't control, let them go and don't get anxious about them. I find I'm always reminding myself of things like that. Why am I worrying about that? It's out of my control. It's in there. And I think it puts for a healthier space. And could you imagine, you talked about the affidavits and so forth, you got to imagine your kids reading those in the future, which I'm not sure if that would ever happen, but there's a likelihood it could happen if it was with the other party. So I'm not sure I want to be in that negative space and be back and forth all the time. So good piece of advice.
And I think if you don't think your kids are picking up on that, then you're wrong. Even like young kids are picking up on that sort of thing. So I think it's just something really important to remember. And you're not gonna come off very well. And people, of course, come to these interactions and they say, "But look what they said to me." And part of a lawyer's role is to look back at it and go, yeah, I see that. That's right. But also your message isn't great. Like, I'm not loving what you said when you retaliate. Oh, but they said it first. Of course, like, we get it. We've been there. Yes, they probably, if you were best friends and you love this person, you'd probably still be together. Of course, there's going to be some conflict there, but you have your sphere of influence of things that you can control, and your behavior is one of those things, as hard as it might be. And if you need to write that awful message, send it to your sister or your mum and say, I just need to get this off my chest. Don't send it to your ex, because it's not, if you better believe they're putting it in their back pocket to produce it later.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that for me personally, the best piece of advice was to treat it like a business relationship. And that completely changed my thinking. And I used to write it on a bit of paper, and I was not putting it anywhere near a text message so you could accidentally send. And then I'd throw it out and put it away, and I felt so much better. And I think I was always told, stop worrying about the things you can't control. And it's hard, so hard in the moment. And divorce is not a good thing. But I think if you try and think of business relationship and stop worrying about the things you can't control, and listen, don't hear what the lawyer says. And I think you're going to you'll take in what they're saying, because people don't really listen; they only hear. And there's a difference, because it's more like active learning. So great piece of advice. Before we part, Ella, can I please ask, is there anything more you'd like to add to this conversation?
Not really. As I said, I think for me, like I've never been the lawyer that's like, you need a lawyer, you need advice. Like there's so many people who come to see me early on, before they've even separated, and we'll have a conversation. I'll say, look, you need to go away and deal with the emotional stuff first. Like that's a really big thing for you before you, like, good on you for getting the practical advice and the pragmatic stuff. And that makes people feel better and like they're taking control. But I think that make sure you've dealt with that stuff first. And then, I think it's really appropriate and a great idea to get some advice. And there's lots of great like free resources and free services, or a 1-hour consult with a lawyer, I would say is something really invaluable, just to get that little bit of information up front, so you can go into this process, armed with that knowledge to help you try and get out of it as quickly as possible. Because that's the game, right? Is like try and get out of it as quickly as possible. I think most people would agree with that.
I agree, and I could not be happier myself in life at the moment. So there is definitely a better side to going through that sort of stuff. But I'm going to mention, so that last question was actually asked by another presenter, and what I'm going to do, we'll at the end of this show, when we finish, I'm going to ask you a question so the viewers know, and you can actually ask me a question, and I can pass that on to the next interviewer. So I'll thanks for being on Divorce Down Under, Ella. I appreciate your time, and it's great to talk to someone from so far as Perth. I used to live there one day, and I hope you enjoy your weekend, because it's a Friday for us.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It was great. Thank you. Great to chat.
Thanks, Ella. Cheers. Bye. Thank you for listening to Divorce Down Under, the Aussie way, helping you navigate a fresh start after divorce. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a review from wherever you are watching or listening, and don't forget to share this with your friends. Also, let us know what you want to hear in future episodes. See you next time for a new episode of Divorce Down Under.